Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bloomberg UK, a new show with a special focus on the biggest challenges facing the British government, the economy, financial services and markets. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, on the show this week, Nicola Sturgeon's shock resignation as Scotland's First Minister has left the future of Scottish independence in doubt. We'll look at what's next for the movement. We'll be speaking with former First Scotland Minister Salman and Director of Chatham House, Bronwyn Maddox, about what Sturgeon's resignation means for the UK. Plus, British gas owner Centrica posts huge profits thanks to soaring energy prices. We'll be speaking with Dale Vince, founder of Ecotricity, a UK-based renewable electricity supplier, about the energy space. But we start with Nicola Sturgeon's shock resignation as First Minister and leader of the SNP, which has upended the quest for Scottish independence, with now the future of the movement itself in doubt. Well, Lizzie Burden explains.
I am announcing my intention to step down as First Minister and leader of my party.
If Nicola Sturgeon can't lead Scotland to independence, who can? As the nation's longest-serving and first female First Minister, she's been a force to be reckoned with. But then, in a complete surprise, she announced she's quitting. So what's next? Under her leadership, the Scottish National Party has dominated every election north of the border since the 2014 independence referendum, turbocharged by opposition to Brexit. But her repeated campaigns for a second independence vote have fallen flat. Now Sturgeon's party is deciding how next to pressure the UK to hold another vote. And with a recent YouGov poll showing that support for both the SNP and independence has waned, opinion is split. Some say a decision to use the next UK general election as a de facto vote on independence, as Nicola Sturgeon had planned, would be a mistake, because it wouldn't be recognised. Whatever direction the nationalist movement takes, Nicola Sturgeon won't be the driving force. She's handing over that hot potato to her successor, saying she won't stand in the way.
Lizzie Burden there on Nicola Sturgeon's legacy as Scotland's First Minister. Now, we're now joined by the former Scottish First Minister and SNP leader, Salman, who now leads the pro-independence Alba Party. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Salman. Whatever your differences with Nicola Sturgeon, you have to acknowledge is that she was a very powerful voice, of course, in the independence movement. Does her departure damage the push for independence?
Well, obviously, it'll go through a new phase, but can I just remind you, when I resigned in 2014, I heard exactly the same voices saying independence was peaked. And what happened was a few months later, the unionist parties, Labour and Conservative, they lost all their seats in Scotland. So support for Scottish independence shifted in 2014 to almost half of the population, and basically it's remained there. Up and down, certainly, but it's remained there ever since. So the next leader who comes in to lead the SNP and become First Minister will inherit a position incomparably better than when I became the First Minister back in 2007.
But do you see a risk now that internal divisions, but also a lack of a strong, obvious successor to Nicola Sturgeon will lead to the resurgence of pro-union political politics and policies, including Labour?
Well, I mean, certainly it's the case that a difference between now and 2014 is that when I resigned, Nicola Sturgeon was a shoo-in to be my successor. This time round, there's maybe half a dozen people who would have a claim, some of the old guard, but some new faces. But they're talented people. And the next leader comes in, and it'll depend entirely on what that leader does. If that new First Minister reunites the independence movement, perhaps through an independence convention, brings in parties like Alba and the Greens who believe in independence, cross-party groups, then the process might be a reinvigorating one. It will depend entirely what happens when the new leader comes in.
Right.
But the Unionist Party thinking that what happens to the SNP, any political party who believes that their success depends on what another party does is doomed for failure. That's what happens to political parties who don't have a clue how to do things for themselves.
Right, but as you've said, this relies solely on the new leader. Who do you think should lead this party? Who do you think has the best chance? So they have to be like Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, there's choices. I mean, they can go for the people who've been around for a while. There's sort of people like Angus Robertson, Hamza Yousaf, Keith Brown, or they could go for the new guard of people coming through. There's people like Kate Forbes, Ash Denham. There's a variety of people in Westminster who are talented. Angus MacNeil, Joanna Cherry, who successfully defeated Boris Johnson in the English High Court on Brexit. So there's a range of talented people. Well, what's going to matter?
Who's your money on? If there's one person that you think...
No, I think it'll be one of the new guard. And what will happen is what will decide whether this is a reinvigoration of the national movement or a setback will be what that new leader does. But can I just repeat that, when I became leader of the SNP way back for the first time, the SNP were, independence was a pipe dream supported by a small number of people. The SNP were a fringe party. The SNP are now the dominant party in Scotland. The national movement is the most powerful force in Scotland. A reunited national movement will be unstoppable. And therefore, a lot's going to depend who is elected and, above all, the approach they take to bring the movement back together.
But what would you consider to be Sturgeon's greatest achievement during her time in office, given actually you're not really any closer to independence since 2014?
Well, her greatest achievement was as a communicator. I mean, Nicola is a first-class political communicator, as was shown during Brexit. I beg your pardon, as was shown during the pandemic, I would say, where the messaging from Edinburgh was much, much superior to the messaging from London. And she wins elections. But you're quite right. I mean, her failure has been she hasn't advanced the support for independence further forward than it was 8 years ago. But it was at a high level 8 years ago. So the SNP and the national movement and the next First Minister are looking for a strategy as well as looking for a new leader. But if that strategy is found, and if it's one of uniting the movement, then the process can be a reinvigorating one. As I say, political parties who think that they need the SNP failure or the SNP indecision as the route to success, any political party that wants to succeed has to do it on their own merits. That applies to the Unionist Party, applies to the party I lead, it applies to every political party, and it applies to the SNP.
So what would you focus on at the moment? Is this actually a good opportunity to focus, all of the energy on independence, and is this a distraction instead of focusing on improving the quality of public services and the performance of the Scottish economy?
Well, I mean, the problems that the Scottish Government have encountered recently have been because they've shifted focus onto other issues apart from independence. And the next leader should settle these. I mean, there's problems in the health service and the education system. There's difficulties with some legislation coming, lack of enforcing a commitment, the gender recognition bill. The key to winning independence is to get the focus back on the biggest issue in Scotland. If you're about to talk about Centrica profits, we've got 1 million Scots in fuel poverty amid our land of energy plenty. We have a nation which is being denied the right of self-determination. That's the issue.
So focus less on independence and focus more on these issues. If you also look at the budget deficit in Scotland, it's much higher than the UK's overall. It's much higher than many EU countries, and certainly than the EU's preferred level. What's the right way forward?
Well, the right way forward is to get the focus back on independence. I mean, this impression that the trouble with the SNP's encountered is because they focused on independence. The trouble the SNP's encountered is because they've been focusing on other issues which have split their party and their movement. Get the focus onto independence, onto the arguments for it. And incidentally, the idea that the most energy-rich country in Europe, which has massive supplies of clean, green, renewable, affordable power coming out of its ears, could produce 5 times as much electricity as it requires, will be in any economic difficulty with independence, is for the birds. Independence will be the key to unlock a prosperous future for Scotland.
What should the new SNP leader do with currency? So would an independent Scotland actually have a new currency and attempt to join the euro, or continue to use sterling and import some of the monetary policy from the rest of the UK?
Well, that's been one of the difficulties that the SNP have had deciding, and I would advise the new leader to opt for a new currency as quickly as possible. Of course, you'll always be able to use sterling, because sterling's an internationally tradable currency, but the most economically advantageous position would be to opt for a new currency as quick as possible. And as far as Europe's concerned, an ambition to rejoin the European Union over the medium term is fair enough. But the immediate priority is to get back into the single market. And the way to do that is through the European Free Trade Association, where the timescale for entry into that is a matter of months, not the years it takes you to get back into the European Union. So I certainly would advocate we should orientate the European policy towards rejoining the largest single market in the world through the European Free Trade Association.
But if you start talking about a new currency, does that not alienate voters that maybe then go to Labour?
Well, if you explain it properly and explain it in the sense that you can keep your assets in sterling if you so wish, so you keep your pension in sterling if you so wish, there's no difficulty with that. But the advantages of having a new currency in terms of economic flexibility are very, very strong. You've got to remember the UK is now a weak economy. It's a weak economy for two reasons. It has low productivity, and secondly, it is denied access to the biggest single market in the world on unfettered terms. The way to ensure success for the Scottish economy is to use our high productivity in key industries like energy and to get back into that 500 million single market. That should be the economic priority. It's worth looking, incidentally, that Northern Ireland, which traditionally, as you know, has been one of the most difficult areas for growth in the United Kingdom, because it stayed in the single market after the Brexit deal, has had the best relative economic statistics in history compared to the other nations of the UK. That should be a clue to what Scotland's economic priority should be, and that's rejoining the single market.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of numbers. We'll have to get you back on because there are numbers also that we're looking at that are independent, that have questionable statistics on education and the like.
Yes,
Alba Parker, former Scottish.
Interesting, because previously
we'll get you back on.
Northern Ireland's slow growth rate. The very fact that there's an argument now indicates the advantage of access to the single market.
We'll get you back on and we'll discuss this at length. The former Scottish First Minister Alex Salmon joining us this morning. Coming up, we continue the conversation, of course, on the impact of Nicola Sturgeon's shock resignation with Bronwyn Maddox, director of Chatham House. That's coming up next, and this is Bloomberg. Let's continue the conversation on the impact of the shock resignation of Nicola Sturgeon as First Minister. Now, my guest is director of London-based think tank, the Institute for Government. So we were talking, of course, about some of the pitfalls of what that means for independence. We also had a good conversation with Alex Salmon about everything that was coming up, including a possible referendum. Now, we're now joined by Bronwyn Maddox, director of Chatham House. Bronwyn, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, once and for all, do you consider the stepping down of Nicola Sturgeon a setback for Scotland? You're an independent think tank. Like, how should, the Prime Minister view this?
Oh, you've got lots of questions in there. Is it a setback for Scotland? No. Is it a setback for Scotland's independence? At the moment, yes, but that's a movement with an awful lot of momentum behind it, particularly among younger Scots. Is it a setback for Rishi Sunak? Absolutely not. Nor for Keir Starmer, who must be quite relieved this morning, I think, that such the champion of Scottish independence has stepped off the stage, and it is not quite clear yet who's going to follow her. Your interview with Alex Salmon broke off at a really interesting point, and you were just getting on to education and indeed health. And critics of Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP would say, look, they've been in control for a long time and standards of health and education have not thrived under them. And Scotland is really strained to try and pay for those things. And that's where the next focus of the next leader ought to be. And so that's why I gave you the answer I did at the beginning of, is it bad for Scotland? I think it is good for Scotland that the next leader is probably going to have to focus on those things.
But how does it affect overall the political landscape in Scotland? So many observers are now speculating that it plays in favour of the unionist parties, particularly Labour.
I think that's exactly right. At the moment, it is Labour's big chance after many years in the wilderness, if you like. They are the main unionist party capable of picking up picking up votes, and they had, in the past, but not the distant past, voice of Gordon Brown, former Labour leader, big advocate for the Union, for Scotland being part of the United Kingdom. So they have a script, if you like. They have a resonance about it, and they have their arguments there. But the polls suggest that the voters that they're picking up are more the ones who are inclined to vote. They're not really making inroads into the independence vote. Yeah. They're picking up unionist voters, and they need to be able to make inroads into the actual SNP's independence vote. And lots of those are younger Scots, and that's really where the battle is at the moment.
Yeah. But why is there a lack of an obvious strong successor? Was this not planned out? And again, what does it mean for the focus? I mean, you have someone who will be relatively new, that actually people don't know that much, we think, and it'll be hard to prioritize.
Well, it will and it won't. I think it is I think it is the right time, even if possibly slightly late. The momentum had gone out of whatever Nicola Sturgeon was arguing. Her fine points were really over in the wake of Brexit, saying, look, many Scots really, really wanted to stay part of the European Union. And then, as Alex Salman was saying, during the pandemic, where she was just more sure and definitely looked more disciplined than Boris Johnson and then the government in the UK, in Westminster, though actually it's very debatable about whether the results of her slightly different decisions on lockdown made very much difference at all. But she was a very good communicator about it. Yeah. But she'd stalled, and then she lost these two recent legal battles over the referendum and then over the gender recognition. Mm-hmm. And it's not clear where all this is going. So I think it was the right time.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. Bronwyn Maddox, their director of Chatham House, joining us. And apologies, I keep on losing my voice because there's just so much news out there. Be sure to subscribe also to Bloomberg's In the City podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we talk about Adani and the impact this has on the City of London. We also have a great, terrific story actually about the new city minister and what he's suggesting investors do if they want to sue the Bank of England. New episodes drop every Thursday, so the latest one is out today, and this is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg UK. Now, British gas owner Centrica is boosting its share buyback program after reporting a record profit last year, joining Shell and BP reaping the rewards of soaring energy prices. Well, here to break down the results for us, Bloomberg's Rachel Morrison, who leads our team for power, gas and renewables in Europe. So, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, it was an interesting set of results.
Yes, record profits for Centrica, and it comes at a really sensitive time, just 2 weeks after this prepayment meter scandal where they were accused of forcing vulnerable customers to take these prepayment meters. So there's already a windfall tax on companies like BP, Shell and Centrica in the UK, but these are extra profits, record profits at a time when we expect customer bills to go up. So it's really difficult because the company were under pressure to turn around a really difficult time where they were, really not doing very well. But that turnaround has come at the same time as the cost of living crisis. And so it's difficult for them to position these results. And the CEO this morning has been saying, we feel for households who can't pay their bills, but also they have investors to answer to. And that's really what they're trying to do, to sort of give back to those investors that have stuck with them through the hard times. But politically, it does look difficult for them.